Hi guys, welcome to this video where we're going to look at how to do a quick circuit in a Cessna 172. I've got Active Sky Next installed, so it's first few goes of running this, but it's going to give me some realistic weather and wind conditions for here at Birmingham. Ironically today the weather is fairly calm out there, although it has nicely replicated the rather grubby cloud base we've got. So without further ado, just going to have a quick look at a couple of things in relation to the circuit. The first thing we need to consider is the speeds we're going to fly. So if I go up to the menu, select kneeboard and reference, we come up with this rather natty little list of speeds. Now, only a couple of speeds we need to worry about, and they're V speeds down here, which is VS, stalling speed, maximum weight flaps up 48 knots. That's what the manufacturers think, that in a fully laden Cessna 172 with clean airframe we're going to fall out the sky at that speed. And then VSO, stalling speed in landing configuration. VSO I like to think of as it's got all the stuff out. You can replace the S for another word if you wish, but at the moment I'll just call it VSO with stuff out, and that speed is 40 knots indicated airspeed. Now we don't really want to fly our approach at 40 knots indicated airspeed. We want to fly our approach with a safety margin, and the safety margin generally used in aviation is to fly at 1.3 times the VSO. Roughly equates to adding a third to this, takes it from 40 knots to about 53 knots. Now with the best will in the world, I can't fly precise on this airspeed indicator to plus or minus 1 knot, so I would consider it to be 55 knots as our threshold speed. Now because of the wind, we haven't got much today, but I would consider adding 5 knots. So we're going to fly our approach when we've got everything out at 60 knots, aiming for 55 knots over the threshold. The other speed to consider is the VY, best rate of climb speed. When we take off, we've only got a single engine. Even if we had a twin engine, we want to get away from the ground as fast as we can, because it's hitting the ground that's a problem. And if we have an engine failure or some sort of technical failure, we need to make sure that we've got options for where we land, where we touch down, etc. Right, so let's get rid of that. Okay, now we've got our speeds. A couple of things to help us out here. We're going to fly a left-hand circuit or traffic pattern if you're in the US. So the first thing to do is to give us an appreciation of which way the runway is heading. If I move the heading bug to our current heading along the runway 330, matches our magnetic compass up here, so we know that all the instruments are in line. Second thing we need to know is how far above the runway we are. Now there's various pressure settings used in aviation, one of which is QFE. QFE is the elevation above the airfield. So you can think of the F as the field and the E as the elevation. It's important because we're going to fly this at 1,000 feet, mainly because 1,000 feet is generally accepted to be the standard circuit height. It does vary, so for example you might have areas with high terrain where you fly higher, you might have areas with controlled airspace above where you fly lower, and of course the type of aircraft can change it. Next thing to note is on our direction indicator down here, our compass, there's marks at cardinal points. On this one it's 240, 90 degrees left of our current heading, behind us is 150, and to the right is 060. Now that tells us a useful bit about the circuit. We're going to fly out of here heading 330, we're going to turn left, and our next heading we're looking for is 240, then we're going to turn left again for 150, finally left onto our base leg of 060, and then back onto our runway heading for short final. So that's pretty much set up. We've got ourselves organised as to where we're going. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So I haven't got auto coordination on the rudder, so if you see this thing waving around in the air, it's because of my ineptitude with the pedals, and away we go. So first thing we're looking for is on our airspeed. We're going to rotate at 65 knots, give ourselves a good margin above our stall speed. So there's 65 knots now, and bringing the nose of the aircraft up. We're trying to establish ourselves in a 75 knot climb, which we've got there or thereabouts. So now I get an opportunity to trim the aircraft rather coarsely, but there we go, and we've got ourselves established nicely in the climb. Now if I were inclined, or if it were necessary at this point, I would look to do my after takeoff checks. However, certainly in a light aircraft, in bigger aircraft you would wait a considerable period longer. As we approach 500 feet, we're now looking to turn left 90 degrees onto 240. Now we use a fairly shallow angle of bank at this point because we're not flying very far above our stall speed, and we don't want to generate what's called an accelerated stall. We don't want to deliberately fly at a rate of speed or at a rate of turn or a rate of climb which is going to induce a stall in the aircraft. But as we get close to 240, there we go, rolling out, still in our climb, still looking to maintain 75 knots, and as we get close to 1,000 feet, that's our intended climb, our intended circuit altitude. So 50 feet to go, going to start lowering the nose, going to leave the power where it is just so that we're going to accelerate towards our circuit speed of 100 knots. Can turn now a little bit more vigorously, climbing a little bit too much. 100 knots is coming up, so reducing power, and our next cardinal point we're looking for is 150 on the compass, which is going to be about there. And once we've gone around the corner, we're stable. At this point I would, in real life, I would call myself downwind, because we're a light aircraft and it's a long runway. We're actually about halfway down the runway, but there we go. So at this point I would consider doing my downwind checks. So reviewing it, we took off, we turned left onto what's called the crosswind leg, and we're now flying downwind, which is parallel to the runway with the wind roughly behind us. Now there's not much wind. The next point we're looking at is when the runway threshold where we're landing, which is where the white marks are, is approximately 45 degrees behind our wing. That gives us our position that we ought to be looking at to start our left hand turn onto base. Now if you look at the compass at the bottom, you can see we've got the orange bug heading for our compass mark behind us at the moment. That tells us we are flying pretty much parallel but away from the runway. Let's check our position. There we go, it's 45 degrees behind us. So at this point I'm going to start our turn to the left. I'm going to reduce some power as well. The aim being now we need to slow down because we need to be looking at getting the flaps out. It's just started to rain in Birmingham, so it's deep joy, lovely for us. We're into the white arc of the airspeed indicator, so we can put our first stage of flap down as we continue to slow down. Now because of high wing I can't see where the airfield is, which is why it becomes useful to have our markers. So I've started turning so that we're onto 060, and you can see we're nicely perpendicular to our runway now. Now the speed's 70 knots, which is fine at the minute because we've only got one stage of flap down. Try and trim us out a little bit. Now I'm looking to turn onto our final course at about 600, maybe 500 feet. The airspeed's at 70 knots at the moment, so I'm quite happy with that. And we're going to turn now. Speed's coming back gradually, just need to watch that in the turn. Same thing as when we were doing our climbing turn. We don't really want to turn too steeply at low airspeed, so we're just dropping down towards 60 knots, rolling out a little bit there because we're slightly early onto our turns to finals there. Much easier to judge in real life because obviously you've got much easier view, so to speak. Okay, so it says we're a little bit low. It's not a problem, we can adjust our rate of descent. It's a visual approach, so it's less crucial than say an ILS approach, but we're coming back towards the centre line nicely. Now I strongly suspect, although I haven't checked it, the wind is from the right here. Full flaps now going down, and yeah, it's certainly trying to blow us to the left of centre line. So 60 knots now established there, and we're coming down nicely, 300 feet per minute rate of descent. As I said, we're looking for 60 knots final speed, and we've got a constant viewpoint coming down as we're looking at it. So probably got about 150 feet to go. We'll have 100 feet as we come over the start of these red lights. Still at 60 knots. Still at 300 feet per minute rate of descent. Canted off slightly to the right. That's obviously to do with the wind is coming from the right. As we get to the threshold, we'll have about 50 feet to land. 50 feet altitude, or elevation I should say. So I'm going to start bringing the throttle now, aiming for our 55 knots. There's the 55 knots, and flaring. Instructors in real life will always tell you flare when it feels like the ground is coming up to meet you. and I can't think of a better way of describing it with such a big runway. But there we go, nice touchdown, nice landing, and hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next instalment.